The old floorboards groaned as Isabella Green stepped barefoot across the cabin she hadn't seen since she was a child. The early light was soft, golden, as if the sun were just brushing the world awake with cautious fingers. Outside, a thick mist clung to the dense canopy of the floor's nature reserve, blurring the outlines of trees into ghostly silhouettes. Bird calls rose like fluted notes over the hush of the forest, and somewhere nearby, a howler monkey barked into the silence. She paused at the open window, letting the air, heavy with the scent of damp leaves and blooming orchids, fill her lungs. Her fingers lingered on the edge of the sill, rough wood pressing against her skin, grounding her in a place that once felt like the entire world. It had been 20 years since she'd last stood here. 20 years since she'd left this very cabin, with swollen eyes and an aching heart, torn away from the only home she'd ever known. And from her, Sienna. The name still echoed inside her like a soft drum beat. That wild creature with the amber eyes, the bobcat she'd raised from a near-blind cub. She could still picture her, fur dappled like fallen sunlight, ears tipped with little black brushes, eyes always watching, always knowing. She reached up and touched the pendant around her neck, worn smooth over decades. A small stone, golden and warm, shaped like a feline eye. Her father had given it to her on her 6th birthday, saying, "You and Sienna, same soul, two paths." At the time, she hadn't understood. She did now. The cabin hadn't changed much. Dust covered the old wooden desk her father once sat at, pencil always scratching across his ever-growing collection of field journals. In one corner, a faded cot sat where she used to sleep, often curled up with a bobcat pressed against her legs. On the wall, a sun-bleached photo showed her younger self, tousled hair, muddy knees, laughing, her arms wrapped around a lanky young bobcat cub whose paw was nearly as big as her hand. She swallowed hard. Her return hadn't been celebrated. Officials had warned her off. "That bobcat's long gone," they said. "If she ever lived this long, she's wild now. You won't find what you're looking for." But Isabella had learned long ago not to put her faith in warnings. She hadn't come here out of whimsy or nostalgia. She came because, after her father passed, she found something in his journal, a final entry. Just a single sentence, scratched into the margin of a worn page filled with field notes. Sienna seen again, North Grove, last dry season, strong, watching, waiting. That question mark haunted her, not just as a scientist, but as a daughter. As the girl who had whispered promises into a bobcat's ear, who had believed, childishly perhaps, that love alone could knit two species together forever. So, she returned, older now, weathered by years in the field, Alaska, Madagascar, Mongolia, but never anywhere as sacred to her as this. The journey hadn't been easy. She had taken a rickety bus from Tuxtla Gutierrez, then a half-day ride in the back of a supply truck, bouncing over dirt roads until the forest thickened and the road vanished into a footpath. From there, she walked. She carried only essentials: a sat phone, water, a solar-charged camera trap, and her father's maps, yellowed with time. And now she was here, back where it all began. A breeze rustled the leaves, whispering through the mahogany trees that towered over the cabin. The scent of wild vanilla and moss drifted in. Something in the wind felt familiar, almost like a greeting, a welcome home. She stepped out onto the porch, letting her eyes scan the dense undergrowth beyond the clearing. The forest was vast, and Sienna could be anywhere, or nowhere. But deep in her chest, Isabella felt a pull, like an invisible string tugging her forward. Her father used to say that every creature in the forest had its own path, invisible to the eye, but known by the heart. She would trust that. Her boots thudded softly on the dirt as she crossed the clearing and followed an old trail that led deeper into the trees. The path was overgrown, but she recognized it, the same one she used to take with her father, and later with Sienna at her heels, bounding clumsily through ferns and fallen logs. With every step, memories surged up like spring water. The day she first met Sienna, a tiny, trembling scrap of fur found wedged beneath the roots of a ceiba tree. Her father had said she wouldn't survive the night. Isabella had stayed up beside her all night, stroking her tiny back, whispering, "Don't go. Please don't go." Sienna hadn't gone. She had grown strong, fierce, wild. And then she had gone, eventually, into the jungle where she belonged. The thought still tugged at something deep in Isabella, a strange ache that had never fully healed. But now, with her feet sinking into the damp earth of her childhood home, that ache was tinged with something else, hope. She reached the edge of the trail and crouched. Beside a familiar boulder, covered in lichen and moss, carved faintly into the rock was a tiny symbol, a spiral sun her father had etched one evening after watching Sienna chase shadows. He said it was their mark, a way to remember that wildness and warmth could exist side by side. She ran her fingers over it. Still here, she murmured, and then, faintly from the trees, movement. She held her breath. Just a bird, startled, a rustle, the jungle teasing her. But Isabella knew this was just the beginning. She would search, she would wait, she would listen. Because somewhere out there, past the veil of trees and time, something waited too. Something with golden eyes and a memory of a girl who once promised she'd come back. The sun had barely begun its ascent, but the forest was already stirring. A red-capped mannequin darted low across the path, wings flicking like sparks. High in the canopy, spider monkeys gossiped with agitated squeals, branches swaying in rhythm. Everything pulsed with a quiet urgency, as if the jungle itself knew someone had returned. Isabella moved slowly, her footsteps softened by the loam beneath them. Each step felt more like a conversation than a movement, as if she were speaking with the forest again after all these years, listening, apologizing, asking permission. She reached the North Grove by mid-morning. Her father's journal had marked this area often, frequent sightings, rich in prey, territorial signs. But the entry that brought her here was different, the one that mentioned Sienna just a few months ago. That was why she had to see this place again. The grove was quiet, cupped in the arms of two gently sloping hills, ringed with bromeliads and low ficus trees. Isabella crouched near a shallow stream that sliced through the earth, its clear water catching shards of sunlight. She saw them almost immediately, prints, not fresh, not crisp, but unmistakable, feline. She knelt, brushing away leaves and silt. A wide paw, 3 clear pads, claws not extended, not jaguar, too small for that, not ocelot either. She tilted her head, staring at the placement, powerful, deliberate. Her heart thudded. Could be. She reached into her bag and pulled out a weatherproof notepad, sketching the outline quickly before photographing it. She then set up a camera trap across the stream. It was a long shot, but she wasn't here to rush. She was here to remember and wait. Back at the cabin that evening, she lit a small lantern and opened one of her father's journals. The leather binding had grown stiff, the pages curling at the corners. She turned to the entries dated 15 years ago, around the time she was taken away. Sienna's range expanding, spotted North Ridge, moving with confidence, alone but aware, waited until dusk before approaching the salt lick. Then another. She came closer today, sat on the trail, watched me for 32 minutes, no aggression, just watching. The ink blurred slightly where his pen must have caught on a raindrop, or maybe even a falling tear. Isabella felt her throat tighten. She remembered that day. It was just weeks before child welfare officers had arrived. Her father had tried to explain, to argue that raising a bobcat in the wild wasn't domestication. It was survival. The cub had been orphaned, left blind in one eye by infection, no mother in sight. But to the outside world, it looked like recklessness. They called it imprinting. They said Sienna would never adapt, but they were wrong. Sienna hadn't clung to Isabella. She had learned to hunt, to stalk, to vanish into the shadows like mist. She had just stayed close. Not like a pet, but like a sister who understood they were different, but somehow still bound. And when the officers took Isabella away, screaming and clawing against the backseat window, Sienna had emerged from the tree line and stood, just stood, watching the vehicle disappear. Isabella hadn't seen her since, until now. The next morning, Isabella returned to the grove and checked the camera trap. No Sienna, a tapir, a deer, 2 raccoons. But then, something. A shadow on the edge of the frame. She enlarged the image, adjusting contrast. There, just beyond the ferns, a pair of amber eyes. She didn't breathe. It was just a flash, but unmistakable. The curve of an ear, a dappled shoulder, low to the ground, watching her. She stood still for a long time, letting the weight of it settle over her like rain. She wasn't imagining it. Sienna, or something like her, was still out there. And she was aware. Later that day, Isabella wandered into a clearing she hadn't visited since she was 10. It was the place she and Sienna had often played in the late afternoons, when the forest softened and time stretched out like honey. A crooked tree still stood near the edge, bark gouged from years of bobcat claws testing strength and sharpness. She laughed quietly, running her hand over the grooves. And then she did something she hadn't done in years. She called out, softly, cautiously, using the same two-tone whistle her father had taught her. Not a command, just a sound, familiar, gentle. Something from long ago. The forest held its breath. A squirrel darted up a trunk, a bird flitted away, but no bobcat, of course not. Still, she waited. "I'm here," she whispered. "I came back, like I promised." She didn't expect an answer, but then, just before she turned to leave, a sound, a low rustle from the underbrush. She froze. Not the skittering panic of a rodent. This was slower, deliberate. She crouched, heart racing. The brush parted, and there, only for a second, she saw the curve of a feline back slipping through the undergrowth, silent, controlled, watching. Then it vanished. But the feeling lingered, like a breath on the back of her neck. She was being observed, and not with fear, not with anger, with recognition. She stayed until the sun began to fall below the canopy, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and plum. As she walked back to the cabin, the forest alive around her, she felt it more strongly than ever. This was no ghost chase. Something had awakened, something old, something wild, and tomorrow she would follow it deeper. 3. The forest remembers. At dawn, mist clung to the canopy like old breath, coiling through the trees and draping the path ahead in mystery. Isabella stepped into it with careful rhythm, the soles of her boots barely making sound against the wet earth. Her senses had changed. Each crackling leaf, every shift of bird call meant something now. The jungle wasn't just background. It was speaking, whispering. Not yet, not quite. Keep going. And Isabella did. She returned to the grove, then traced the trail north toward the limestone ridge. Her father had taken her there once, before everything fell apart. He told her it was where Sienna first made her den, a hollow tucked between two slabs of rock, lined with the fur and feathers of small prey, where she used to sleep curled tight as a fern. Now, the ridge looked untouched, overgrown with creepers and thyme, but something had changed. The underbrush showed signs of recent passing, not from boots or machetes, but from paws. Claw marks scored a fallen trunk, and near the mossy edge of a rock face, she saw a clear imprint. A single front paw, fresh. Dew still pooled in its shallow grooves. Isabella dropped to one knee. Sienna? It could be. Or another bobcat. She couldn't let hope cloud her reason. Still, the forest felt different here, like it remembered her, like it had stored her scent, her rhythm, somewhere deep in its roots. She moved slowly up the slope, brushing aside vines. At the top, the land opened to a wide clearing scattered with butterfly weed and wild orchids, and right there, where the light poured through a break in the canopy, stood a tree she remembered like a half-forgotten lullaby. A ceiba tree, ancient and broad, arms outstretched as if in welcome. She walked to it, placed her palm on the bark. The grooves were deeper than she recalled, but the tree stood the same, still, immovable, and high on one limb, nearly hidden by leaves, she saw the frayed remains of something tied with string, her bracelet, braided blue thread and 2 beads, sun-bleached now, but unmistakable. She had tied it there the day before she was taken, promising Sienna she would come back. Tears stung her eyes before she knew they were coming. It was such a small thing, but the forest had kept it, for years, for her. She sank to the ground, back against the trunk, and let herself feel everything she had kept bottled since returning. The guilt, the longing, the question that never stopped echoing in her head. Did Sienna wait for me? The answer didn't come in words. It came in sound. A soft crackle, then the delicate snap of twigs. Isabella stiffened, instinct overtaking emotion. She turned her head slowly, every breath shallow. There, just beyond the ferns, near the base of a rock ledge, movement. A figure emerged, not big, not bold, but precise, measured, a bobcat, smaller than a jaguar with thick ruffs of fur at her cheeks and a tail like a paintbrush dipped in ink. Her coat was golden, dappled with spots that shifted with the light. She paused mid-step, lifting one paw and holding it aloft as she studied Isabella. Those eyes, amber, rimmed with pale lashes. One slightly clouded, not blind, but dulled. Left eye. Isabella didn't move. The bobcat sniffed the air once, then twice. Her ears flicked, nose twitching. Then, so slowly it felt like the forest itself was holding its breath, she stepped closer. 3 feet. 2. Close enough that Isabella could see the tiny nick on her left ear, a wound from years ago. One Isabella had cleaned and treated when Sienna was just a few weeks old. It was her, older, leaner, wilder, but unmistakably Sienna. Isabella's breath hitched, but she didn't speak. She didn't need to. Sienna moved in a half circle, not afraid, not entirely trusting, but curious. Her body language was different than before, less affectionate, more reserved, as if the forest had taught her caution. But her eyes stayed fixed. They stood like that for several heartbeats, one woman, one wild cat, connected by something neither science nor memory could explain. Then, without sound, Sienna turned and slipped back into the trees. Gone again. But not lost. That night, Isabella sat outside the cabin beneath a moon tangled in cloud. She didn't sleep. Her mind replayed the moment over and over, the way Sienna had looked at her, not as an intruder or a stranger, but as someone half-remembered, a thread tugged loose from the past. She wrote in her father's old journal, "She's alive. She saw me, and I think she knew." She closed the notebook gently, then stared out into the dark. Something shifted that night. It wasn't just about reunion anymore. It was about rebuilding, not taming, not owning, but offering. She would let Sienna come to her, if she chose. She would earn back trust, not demand it. And the forest? It had already begun to respond. The next morning, she found fresh prints circling the edge of the clearing, a deer carcass dragged nearby, not for her, but close enough to be a message. Sienna was watching, and maybe, just maybe, remembering too. The days that followed were painted with tension and wonder. Isabella no longer searched blindly through the jungle. Now she waited, patiently, deliberately. And slowly, the forest answered. Sienna didn't disappear. She remained a shadow at the edge of sight, trailing behind at dusk, crossing paths just out of reach in the underbrush, her tracks fresh each morning near the camp. She never came close enough to touch, never made a sound, but Isabella felt her presence like a heartbeat in the trees. At first, it was enough, more than she'd dared to hope for, but each day brought a question she hadn't yet asked out loud. Would Sienna ever truly trust her again? And deeper still, should she? One evening, Isabella returned to the grove and found something she hadn't expected. A kill, laid at the edge of the clearing near the ceiba tree, neat, untouched. A rabbit, its fur slick and still warm, neck broken cleanly. No scavenger had taken it, no bite marks marred the flesh. It was not meant as food, it was a gesture. Isabella knelt, not daring to move it yet. The meaning was clear. In the language of the wild, this was a signal, a gift, or a challenge. She looked up and saw her. Sienna, crouched just beyond the tree line, amber eyes locked with hers, chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. There was no fear in her stance, no aggression, only decision. A line was being drawn, invisible but unmistakable. Isabella rose slowly to her feet, heart pounding. She didn't step forward. Instead, she sat down. Cross-legged, hands resting on her knees, gaze steady. No words, no whistles, no outstretched arms. She didn't call Sienna, she invited her. The bobcat watched her for a long while. Then, without warning, she padded closer. 3 steps, then 4. She paused near the rabbit, gave it a cursory sniff, and then looked at Isabella as if to say, "You understand now, don't you? This wasn't about pet and owner, not child and rescued creature. This was 2 beings, once bonded, now worlds apart. trying to meet again, not in memory, but in the present. That night, Isabella wrote in the journal, "She's not asking to come back. She's asking who I've become, and I don't know yet if I have the answer." She slept lightly, dreams tangled with fur and branches, and in the dark, the forest stirred. The next morning, she made a decision. She left the rabbit untouched. Instead, she brought something to the grove, a woven satchel, hand-stitched with old symbols her father once used to mark trails. Inside, she placed a single item, a tuft of fur she had kept all these years, siennas from their early days, when she was a kit who slept curled against Isabella's side during thunderstorms. She left the satchel near the ceiba tree and walked away. It was a test, not of loyalty, but of memory. Would Sienna recognize it? Would she care? When she returned that evening, the satchel was gone. In its place was something she hadn't expected. A feather, jet black, from a crested eagle, rare, even here. A predator's gift to another. It became a rhythm, a quiet conversation built without words. A leaf with claw marks placed near Isabella's sleeping cot. A cluster of crushed berries, rubbed deliberately onto a rock where Sienna often sat. Then, one morning, a pile of torn bark stacked like kindling. Each token meant something, a fragment of trust, a nod to shared space. And Isabella responded. She began singing again, not loudly, just fragments of the lullabies she once hummed as a child, when Sienna would fall asleep in her lap. She let her voice carry into the canopy, offering pieces of memory like breadcrumbs. At first, there was no reply. Then, one twilight, while the sun dipped low and the bats stirred overhead, she heard it. A sound, not a roar, not a growl, but a chuff, short, soft, low. It was a sound of greeting, familiarity. She turned slowly and saw Sienna in the half-light, sitting, ears forward, body relaxed. Still, she did not approach. Isabella didn't move either. She didn't need to. In that stillness, they acknowledged something old made new again. Not captivity, not command, but kinship, fragile, hard-won. But the world outside the jungle was still turning, and it had no patience for slow reunions. One morning, as Isabella was returning from the river trail, she found a man waiting at her cabin. Diego Velázquez, a ranger from the nearby village, kind, weathered, cautious. He had news. "Spotted tracks, South Ridge, larger cat. They think it's a jaguar, close to the cornfields." He paused, glancing at Isabella. "But some say it wasn't a jaguar. They say it was a bobcat, large, bold, too close to humans." Isabella's heart clenched. "She's not dangerous," she said quietly. Diego didn't argue. But not everyone agrees. He handed her a folded paper, a report, an official request for wildlife monitoring. If the sightings continued, relocation, or worse, could be ordered. She stood there, the jungle behind her, the past all around, the paper trembling in her hands. Here was the truth she hadn't faced. Their bond, reborn, could also be Sienna's undoing. That night, Isabella returned to the grove. Sienna was there, as if waiting. Isabella didn't bring tokens, only truth. She sat by the tree, heart heavy. "I don't know if we can have both," she whispered. "The wild and the familiar, safety and closeness. I want to believe we can, but others won't." Sienna tilted her head. Then, so slowly Isabella almost missed it, she stepped forward and pressed her head once, gently against Isabella's knee. Just once. Then she turned and walked into the dark, not fleeing, just deciding. And Isabella knew then. Whatever happened next, the choice would be Sienna's, and it would be right. The final days felt like borrowed time. Every morning, Isabella woke before the mist lifted, listening for the familiar rustle of leaves or the soft pad of paws. Sometimes she heard it, Sienna moving just beyond the clearing, unseen but unmistakably near. Other times, there was only silence. But even in the stillness, Isabella felt the bobcat's presence like a warm breath in the wind. The forest had never felt more alive. And yet, each moment was laced with the knowledge that their story was nearing a turning point, one that would demand something neither of them had ever faced before: letting go, not in loss, but in respect. Word from the village traveled fast. There had been another sighting, this time near livestock pens at the forest's edge. a shadowy figure leaping a fence in a single graceful arc, no harm done, no blood. But the implication was enough. Rumors swirled, hunters muttered. The conservation authorities started asking questions. Isabella felt the walls closing in. She tried to explain. She's not a threat. She's lived here her whole life. But the faces she spoke to didn't see what she saw, a wild creature tempered by love. They saw risk, liability, danger. She follows you, one man said. What happens when she follows someone else? That question haunted her. The next evening, Isabella packed a small bag, not to leave, to walk. She followed the familiar path to the far southern ridge, a place she and Sienna had never gone together. The terrain was steeper, rougher, bristling with vines and slick stones. But it was quiet, untouched, deep enough that even most predators kept their distance. When she reached the crest, she stopped. Below her stretched a valley choked in mist, dense, green, endless. A perfect sanctuary. She left the satchel there, open. Inside, a single item. The feather Sienna had gifted her weeks before. She added something else, her father's compass, cracked and worn, the one he'd used to map the selva long before Isabella had known what it meant to belong to a place. She whispered into the air, "If you want to stay near, stay. But if you need to go, this is the path." She didn't return to the grove for 2 days. Something inside her said it was time to let the space breathe. When she came back, the satchel was gone. So was Sienna, and for the first time since that first soft chuff in the night, the clearing felt truly, heartbreakingly empty. Grief didn't hit her like a storm. It seeped in slowly, like fog. She kept working, tagging orchids, documenting jaguar paths, maintaining camera traps. Her journal thickened with notes, the pages bending under humidity and memory. Sometimes she walked to the old trail Sienna used to follow, just in case. But weeks passed, then a month, then another. No sign, no feather, no paw prints. And still, Isabella stayed. Because this wasn't just about Sienna. It never had been. It was about honoring a life lived alongside the wild, not in control of it. She taught a new intern about bobcat behavior. She led a school group through the jungle, pausing beside the ceiba tree without explaining why her voice caught there. She watched the seasons shift, vines curl tighter, rain fall heavier, and in all of it, she waited, not with expectation, with faith. It was deep into the wet season when it happened. A ranger radioed from the high ridge, breathless with awe. "There's a bobcat up here, female, large. She's got kits." Isabella froze. The valley. She asked nothing more, said only, "Leave her be," and hiked up that night. The journey took hours through thick mud and drumming rain, but when she reached the overlook, she didn't search. She just sat. In the dark, across the gully, something moved, a low shape, then another, smaller, and then a sound, a chuff, short, software low. She never saw them clearly, just the flicker of movement, the flash of a spotted flank disappearing into the green. But she knew. Sienna had chosen the wild, not out of fear, not to escape, but because something in her had understood that freedom was not the opposite of love. It was an expression of it. Isabella wept that night, not in sorrow, but in something deeper, a release. She whispered into the wet earth, "You made it." Years later, the forest changed again. New policies, better protections, more land preserved. They called it the Sienna Corridor, an expanded stretch of jungle designated for native felines to thrive undisturbed. Isabella never told the officials why she cried when they announced it. She remained in the selva, her hair silvering, her boots still caked in soil, still climbing the ridges, still sleeping in canvas tents under the stars. And sometimes, at dusk, she would walk to the grove where it all began. She'd sit by the ceiba tree and hum a lullaby, voice soft, unbroken, just in case the forest still listened, just in case Sienna did too. Because some bonds don't need to be held, only remembered. And what the wild keeps, it keeps forever.